So welcome, mothers and others. Today, we're very excited to be speaking with Matthew Dowd, who is running for Texas Lieutenant Governor. Matthew Dowd is a well-rounded, Matthew Dowd has a well-rounded career in politics in Texas. He began his career as a Democrat working on J.J. Pickles' campaign, then on to Lloyd Benson's team. And you may not know this, but he also worked with Ann Richards' campaign for governor. Matthew still maintains a close relationship with Ann's daughter, Cecile Richards. He knows what is expected from a lieutenant governor because he worked for one of the best actually, Bob Bullock, before switching parties to become a Republican and later joining George W. Bush's team in 2004. But that didn't last long. He parted ways with the Bush team and the Republicans in 2007 to become an independent. And then he came full circle to become Democrat again. You may recognize Matthew Dowd from TV for his roles in the past few years as a political analyst for ABC News. Mr. Dowd has also taught at the University of Texas LBJ School of Public Affairs, and he is a New York Times bestseller of several books, such as A New Way, Embracing the Paradox as We Lead and Serve, and Revelation on the River, Being a Prophet for Your Own Path. Some of you on Twitter know him as a very thoughtful, peaceful, and insightful human with strong faith and a deep love for Texas, especially Wimberley. Welcome, Matthew Dowd. We are so happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you all for having me, and it's really a pleasure to be with y'all, and I really am grateful, and the state is grateful for the work you're doing to sort of bring us back to a place of goodness and decency again. So thank you for all of that, and I'm happy to take this in whatever way we want. I could give a short start or however y'all want to do this.
Yeah, I wrote down a few questions, and I just thought I would ask you some questions. We go along, and then towards the end, we open it up for some questions from our audience.
Sure, that's great. Awesome.
Okay, so first question. Now, Matthew, talk to us about your decision on why you're running for lieutenant governor. Why are you doing this?
So I think that's a great way to start. So if you had asked me on New Year's Day of this year, if I was going to run for public office, I would have laughed and said, no way, my life was good. As you said, I live out here in Wimberley. It's a beautiful area. I live on the Blanco River. I have 4 kids. The youngest 2 just went off to college. My daughter just went off to college. Enjoy life with them. But in the aftermath, I've grown concern over the last 5 years of what's happened to our politics nationally and in the state. And then January 6th, I think, was a pivotal moment for me, which is that the idea that we could have an attack on our democracy here on the US Capitol, and then the Republicans seek to hold no one accountable for it, zero accountability for that, which I believe was the greatest attack on our democracy since the Civil War at this time. And so in the aftermath of that, I started asking myself, as I'm sure each of you have done over the last few years, is what more can we do? What more can we stand up for this? And so I became I worked with the Democratic chair of Hays County, where I live, became a volunteer deputy registrar. So I thought, okay, I can help register voters. I can do more. I've always tried to speak out, and I've tried to speak out even more forcefully over the last year on this and what we're faced with. I believe that there's only one small d Democratic Party, meaning a party that stands for our democracy, and that's the Democratic Party. I think the Republicans have completely lost their way and gone awry and don't stand for what our Constitution stands for, just don't stand for, as my campaign talks about, common sense with common decency for the common good. And then watching the legislature unfold with both Greg Abbott and the guy I'm running against, Dan Patrick, who I know this is a group of mothers against Greg Abbott, but in my view, Dan Patrick is as bad or worse than the governor is. I think he pushes these things in his own way to make the governor even worse. I think the governor in many ways is weak and doesn't respond and doesn't stand up for what we need him to stand up for, which is Texas families here. And so as I watched that, I started saying, maybe there's something more I could do. So I thought, I could run. The office of lieutenant governor is incredibly powerful. As you all probably are aware, it is one of the most powerful lieutenant governor's office in the country. Most offices in other states are ceremonial. They run with the governor. They run on the same party as the governor. And then they basically just sit in an office not far from the governor and call the governor's doctor every day to see how healthy he is, because all they have is the ability to sort of take over the office. And so watching everything that happened from their response to COVID, from their response to choice, women's freedom to decide, from their response to guns, from their response to the grid, from their response to voting, everything they've done has, in my view, harmed Texans and Texas families in this state. They don't represent the majority. I believe the majority of people in the state are good and decent and kind people. They don't represent the majority of this state. So I thought, I'm going to run. I can spend the next 370 days telling the truth about this on a platform of running for office. As you introduced, I'm very aware of the power of this office because I worked for Bullock for 8 years, who did a lot of good. So yeah, I can see how the power works for good. I also have seen how the power works for bad and can harm us. And so that's really why I'm running. I think that Texas values are something important to me and something important to you all. Things about honesty and integrity and decency and treating everybody with dignity and respect and protecting us and giving people the ability to make decisions in their own life to protect the people locally, whether it's school districts or cities or counties. All of that's been stripped away by, unbelievably to me, the party that supposedly represents freedom, but actually goes out of their way to take the freedom of leaders to protect their own citizens. So I did, and I'm willing to go into I know it's going to be difficult. I know I've already had death threats. I had death threats in my time in speaking out on ABC. I had numerous death threats because I took a stand against Donald Trump pretty strongly. And so I'm used to that part of it. And I think the state is worth it. I love Texas. I absolutely love Texas, but I hate our politics. And it's time for us to put leaders in place that help us and not harm us.
Great. Now, let's talk about some of that. So you've done some work for Democrats in the past, and then Republicans, and then you were an independent, and you're a Democrat again. So why did you make the switch, and why are you running as a Democrat now?
So I give you sort of path, and everybody to give the path of this. I got to know Bush after he got elected governor through my relationship. I was actually not only worked for Bob Bullock, I was good friends with him. He worked, then Governor Bush worked well with the Democratic lieutenant governor and worked well with the Democratic speaker. And they were able to do a lot of good things for the state. They put in place the first ethics laws in our state in the 90s. They did more to protect natural resources in our environment than anybody had done up until then in that time and going through that time, along with Ann when she served for 4 years as governor. And so in the aftermath of that, I had kind of gotten out of politics. I started a business in Austin. And then Governor Bush in 99 approached me about helping him under the idea of we can bring the country together like we did in Texas and do it nationally. I thought that's a great idea. Let's do it. I worked for him. It didn't turn out that way. We also had an intervening events of the two wars, or the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. I had a very public break with then President Bush while he was still president and the GOP over the war and the mistakes that were made, and over the fact that we were divided. The country was being more divided and not unified in that time. And so I became an independent, then went to work for ABC News, and then left ABC News in January. I was already speaking out about this. But as I said, I have become a Democrat and have become in a return. of the minority, a small group of people pushing this through. And it's, to me, the only, I wish there was two enlightened political parties that believed in democratic principles in the Constitution. There isn't. There's only one.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I had a similar thing why I left the Republican Party during Bush, during the war. I had this very similar experience, so I can relate to what you're saying. Now, you have said that Texas is in the front and center of on the attack on our democracy. What do you mean by this, and how important are the 2022 elections?
So I'll start with the last question. I thought that the 2020 election was the most important election in our lifetime, and it was up until this year. I actually think 2022 is more important, and I'll tell you why. We obviously elected Joe Biden, which was a vastly better replacement than Donald Trump in the office, and the people he's brought in. We were able to take the Senate back barely and still keep the House in that. But we're faced with now the idea that if the Republicans win in the aftermath of what's happened in the last year, I fear, and there's pretty good evidence, it's going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. If they win after January 6th, and after they've done all of these awful things in Texas, which, as I've said, a vast majority of Texans oppose, but the Republicans only seem to care about 5% of the state, the 5% that votes in the Republican primary, and that pushes their way. They don't care about the rest of the state. And so I believe that if we're not able to win some of these races in Texas, that this thing could get even worse. And it's every day I woke up and watched the Texas legislature and Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick, and every day I thought it can't get worse, and then it gets worse. They do it even worse. And so Texas, to me, the nation is looking at Texas now. Unfortunately, they're looking at us for bad reasons, because we're leading the way. We're leading the way in all the awful. We've gone way further on restricting voter rights. We've gone way further on restricting choice for women. We've been just as bad or worse than what the governor of Florida has done on COVID. All of these things, we are at the center point of the push of the bad in the Republican Party. And they don't seem to care. Dan Patrick and Greg Abbott and others don't seem to care that a majority of the state is against them. They're betting on the idea that they can win a primary and not worry about a general election.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the current Republican Party puts out obvious and harmful lies, such as the election fraud lie, and for some reason is working in their party. As a strategist, how do we undo this damage?
Well, it's funny. I've described, I'll give Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick, who I'm running against, credit for this. They're very consistent in what they do, which is a big issue faces the state. Their first reaction is to lie, and then they put in place policies to make it worse. I mean, it's consistent. It's very consistent. COVID is a perfect example. COVID hits our state. 70,000, nearly 70,000 people in Texas have died. We're about to be the #1 state in COVID deaths, something we don't want to be #1 in, but we're about to be. More Texans have died from COVID in the 18 months than Texans died in every single war added together since the Civil War. Add up all the Texans who've died in all the wars since the Civil War, more Texans have died in the last 18 months. But they lie about it. They lied about the election. We have an election that has the greatest turnout in our history, we have in the most secure election in our history. Their first reaction, lie about it, say there was voter fraud, and then based on that lie, push through voter restrictions in this. There is an ecosystem in the Republican Party that travels in conspiracy theories and lies. And it's the same, you all know it, it's the same sort of group of media, whether it's Breitbart, OWN, Fox News, and then there's a series of Facebook postings. Facebook has been a big part of how this has spread this. In my view, there is a group, and I don't know what the percentage is, 20%, 25%, 30% of the state that we're never going to be able to crack. I just think they're so far down this conspiracy line that rational thought will not reach them. It just will not reach them. But to win an election, we're not going to ever win an election with 70% of the vote. And so our appeal is, one, we tell the truth, and we do it in a in a kind way. We don't have to be mean. We can just tell the truth. Here's the facts. Here's the truth. Here's what it is. And the truth can tell us. But we also have to acknowledge that there are a group of people that are emotionally and culturally attached to this. They're not rationally attached. And this has been my debate with certain people, is there are a group of people that doesn't, no matter how many times you appeal to their brain, it's not going to ever reach their brain because they're attached to it for other reasons. And I always say to people, tell the truth, try to make your argument, try to make a connection. If it doesn't work, just move on from that. But it is a huge concern. And I think we're going to have to answer this, because it's not only a political problem we face, it's a societal communication problem we face, which is a large minority group of people are receiving information that's just completely false, and they're basing their decisions on false information.
Okay, so do you, I'm trying to combine a couple of questions here. So we have seen a lot of incidences of violence against minority groups and Democrats rise since 2016. How far do you think this Republican Party will go?
Well, it's a great question. Every time I've thought it can't go any further, it does. And I'll give you an example of Dan Patrick is a perfect example of what you're talking about, Dan Patrick. All of these words, words are words, but words can encourage other people that may be on the fringe to take acts related to those words. And I think the words that have been used by Donald Trump, Greg Abbott, and Dan Patrick have encouraged people to not gauge themselves in a way that they act in a civil manner. And I think that the rising tide of violence, especially as you say, against people of color, against women, there's been a rising tide of violence against women in their own homes that's happened in the last 5 or 6 years. I think it's all related to the words that were used. And I'll give you one perfect example. Dan Patrick. So Texas has more mass shootings than any other state in the union. We have more mass shootings than any other state in the union. 3,500 people last year died from gun violence in the state, 3,500. What does Dan Patrick do? He makes it easier for people to carry a handgun, openly carry a handgun without a permit or training, And when he was talking about the border the other day, using those same words about invasion and just awful language towards immigrants and towards people of color, were the exact same words, almost to a letter, of what the mass shooter in El Paso, Texas at that Walmart used. Almost the exact same words. And so it has real world consequences. The words we all use, the words our leaders, our politicians use. And we've shown that, look at what's happened in the anti-Semitism, the rise of anti-Semitism, even in Central Texas, right here in Central Texas, which I never thought would occur, but has occurred. And it's directly, in my view, tied to the language and words and the way they have pushed out as people as other that don't look like them. And what them is usually white male Christians. That's usually who they are. And whoever's not that is not good. And I think there are nuts and there are crazy people in this world, when encouraged, do awful things.
That's great. Now, one of the things that we have noticed is that we need to create some common messaging within our own party. So do you think common messaging is an important issue for the Democratic Party right now? Because it seems like the Republicans get up every morning and have a message that they all talk about that day.
So having worked on both sides and watched this and observed it for many years, I mean, I got engaged in politics because of Watergate when I was 12 years old and watched it and then decided I wanted to get involved in politics based on that. So I've been an observer and an active participant in it. Republicans are better at discipline. They're much better at a disciplined message, and they are much better, not everyone, but because there are Democrats that run really good campaigns at times. But overall, the Republicans are much better about it, much more disciplined about it, much more unified in it. And they have an ability of relating all of the issues that we talk about to common values. And people in the end, voters on the end, relate to values before they relate to issues. We have to talk about issues, but we have to talk about issues in the context of values, which is one of the things I'm trying to do in my campaign, which is this whole idea of common sense, common decency for the common good, and values of integrity. And all of the things that I talk about, whether it's expanding Medicaid or dealing with guns or dealing with COVID or giving local control back to school districts and teachers and cities and counties, all of that is related to these broad values. Republicans are much better at that. And I think I've had this conversation with Beto. Beto and I are, just so you're aware, Beto and I are friends. We've been friends for a while in this. And I've talked to him about this, that in order for us to win, we have to have a consistent, concerted, disciplined message from the very top of the ballot all the way down to justice or county commissioner. And Republicans do it well. Republicans do it very well. We have to do that. It's the only way we can win. One, it causes Democrats to turn out because they understand what's the election about and the importance of it. Two, we need to get independents. And three, we need to get those small group of disaffected Republicans in this state in order to win. And they exist, and they want to vote for something other than the Republican Party today. They do not like the Republican leaders today. And so it absolutely, to me, it's one of the most important things why I'm running, to try to show Democrats, here's a way to do this, and we need to be consistent about it and disciplined about it. We can all talk about our own individual issues, but we need to relate it all into a disciplined overall message. Again, it's Republicans do it well, and we have to do it better in order to win in places like Texas.
Yes, that's one of the nice things about our group. We're Mothers Against Greg Abbott, but we're open to independents, Democrats, and some moderate Republicans. So we accept all because we just our goal is just change in Texas, change the tone, because it no longer looks like Texas values, you know? So, and speaking of values, let's talk about values next. So what are the values that underlie your policy positions?
So it comes down to, I'll just do it this way. We should have common sense based policy decisions, which means it's based on science and facts and the truth. The first thing, it ought to be based on science and facts and the truth. Mm-hmm. Secondly, it's this idea of common decency, which is we treat every single person with you can, as a person of faith, I say God-given sense of humanity, but you can do it even as a person that's not faith, just the idea that a shared humanity. We treat all people and relate to all people with a sense of respect and dignity, all people, no matter where they come from, who they are, what they are. And three, and this is a huge divergence, I think, from the Republican Party, is we believe in the common good. We believe that individual actions can be taken and should be taken, and policy action should be based on the idea what's in the best interest of the common good. What is in the best interest of the state of Texas and all Texas families? And that's why, whether it's a COVID policy decision, it should be based in the common good. Whether it's a decision on the freedom of choice, it should be based in the common good. Whether it's a decision on voting, it should be based in the common good, making it easier for people to vote. So that is, to me, the idea of common sense decisions based in science and facts, with treating everybody with common decency for the overall broad common good. That, to me, is the fundamental sort of value argument that I want to have. And on every single one of those, Dan Patrick, my opponent, doesn't believe in anything. He doesn't believe in science. He doesn't believe in treating people with dignity and respect, and he doesn't believe in the common good. And that, to me, every single policy that I talk about can be done through those things.
Okay, that's excellent. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up the group to talk about some of the questions that people have posted and to go over the chat questions. However, before we do that really, really quickly, I want to ask you a couple questions just before that. I'm going to switch a few of my questions around. So if you are not the nominee for lieutenant governor, will you use your political experience to help the Democratic nominee win the lieutenant governor position?
So my goal is to defeat Greg Abbott, Dan Patrick, Ken Paxton, and every single Republican on the ticket. And I will do that if I'm the Democratic nominee for Lieutenant Governor, I will do it. I will help whomever if I'm the nominee, I will help the Democratic nominee for every office, try to win their office. If I'm not the nominee, I'll spend the next 240 days of not being the nominee doing the same thing. And whatever way I can help, whether it's a state rep running in Williamson County or Austin or Houston, or a county judge running in El Paso or Beto or whoever's the attorney general nominee, which I think is important. I am committed to doing that from now until election day of November, whether I'm the Democratic nominee or not.
Great. So you're a team player. Like to hear that.
And I'm happy. I'm going to be happy. We've already had over 1,000 people volunteer, and we've had a ton of grassroots contributions to this campaign. If I'm not the nominee, I'm just going to turn that over and try to facilitate the use of whatever people were advocating for me, for whoever's running on the ticket up and down the ballot.
Great. So why should we support you versus Mike Collier?
So I have made a commitment, and I'm glad you asked that. I've made a commitment at every single gathering I've had. I am not going to run a negative campaign or attack Mike Collier. I think Mike Collier would be a better lieutenant governor than Dan Patrick. That there's no question about that. If Mike Collier wins this race, I will support Mike Collier 1,000% in this race. I think he and I share the same values. We're probably on 90% of the issues, aligned on 90% of the issues. I think what people have to ask themselves is this question. One, does the candidate share your values? Exceedingly important. And two, who is the best Democratic nominee to take the fight to Dan Patrick? Who is the best Democratic nominee that has the best chance of beating Dan Patrick? Once you answer the shares your values, that is the most important question for Democrats voting in the primaries. Who is the best candidate to win? And I'm going to let that decision be made. I'm going to show how I'm going to fight every day for this, push every day for this, do everything. I put together a campaign that runs differently in a much more disciplined way than other campaigns may have been run in the past. But my view is I'm trying to offer an alternative to Dan Patrick, and I'm going to spend every day talking about Dan Patrick. Mike Collier can do whatever he wants to do in the course of that. I just want to show, one, Democrats, I share your values, and two, I believe I have the best shot at beating Dan Patrick in this race, having run a number of campaigns that have won, especially the last campaign I ran for lieutenant governor in state in the 90s, where we won, the last time we won this race. And so it's, people have to ask themselves, who's got the best chance of beating Dan Patrick? Once you answer the question, does this person share your values?
That's great. Thank you so much. We're going to go straight into policy issues. So I'm going to start out with a couple of policy issues that I wrote the questions for in the beginning, and then we're going to start taking the questions from the group. So the first one is, what are your stands on abortion?
So I am pro-choice. I am committed to protecting the woman's freedom to decide in this moment. In this, I've come to this. I was raised Catholic. I was an altar boy. I went to Jesuit college. So I understand that very well, the struggle of people of faith in this and we have to acknowledge that there's people of faith that struggle on this issue. As some of you know, if you follow me on Twitter, I meditate and do centering prayer every morning, and I sometimes post quotes from the Bible and all of that. But I come from this as a vantage point is, even though I might have a Bible sitting on my bedside or I read from, the document that ought to rule is the Constitution of the United States of America. And that Constitution, and confirmed by Supreme Court decisions, is women have a right of privacy and a fundamental right over the last 50 years it's been in place of their freedom to make this decision. Now, if a woman has some question about it, she can talk to her doctor. And if she has some moral question about it, she can talk to her minister or priest, whether that's up to her. But in the end, it shouldn't be some state rep from the panhandle making the decision in the doctor's office. It should be the woman making the decision in the doctor's office, a fundamental decision that is probably one of the hardest decisions that that woman makes. That ought to be made by the woman and not some state rep or some state senator who has no idea what she's going through.
Great, thank you so much. Now, what about gun reform? What are your stance on your policy on gun reform? I am
a gun owner. I own 5 guns. I have 3 shotguns and 2 rifles. I've hunted and I've enjoyed hunting in the past, but I'm a complete believer in common sense gun reform. So I think what we've done in Texas is outrageous. It's made Texas more dangerous and more likely to have gun violence in our state. It's crazy to me. The bill we passed, which ought to be one of the first acts I want to do, is roll back that permitless carry deal. But I also want to, so there would be 3 things I would immediately want to do as Lieutenant Governor. The first is roll back the permitless carry bill. The majority of Texans oppose it. There's no reason for it to exist. It's just outrageous. The second is universal background checks without loopholes. 40% of the guns sold in Texas are sold without background checks. 40%. Nearly half the guns sold in Texas don't have a background check because it's the utilization of the loopholes exist. And third is we ought to have red flag laws. And red flag laws, as many of you all know, is the idea that if somebody's a danger to themselves or a danger to others because of some mental problem or something, or they have a history of abusiveness in their household, somebody can petition a judge to temporarily remove the gun from the household. Most other states have this. And so that to me is, you can be a supporter of the Second Amendment, but you can also say that we absolutely fundamentally need common sense gun reform, which goes along with our Constitution. So it's crucial to me. It's just every time we have a mass shooting, which every 2 or 3 days, it feels like we have multiple gun violence deaths, and Texas refuses to do a single thing to stop it. And matter of fact, they not only do refuse a single thing to stop it, they push through bills making gun violence more likely.
Okay, the next question is, what is your stance on the utility grid? What do you think about offering incentives for it to become sustainable?
So this is a perfect other example where the governor and the lieutenant governor were consistent again. First, we have this awful issue. I know many of you experienced this. I lost water and power here in Wimberley for my house for 8 days. I had to move into a hotel in New Braunfels, and then they lost power and water at the hotel. And then the mayor of Wimberley actually offered me a garage room to stay in until my house, the power was back on and I could get water running again. 700 people died in Texas in the grid failure and the snowpocalypse that we had. Millions were without power and water, and thousands of businesses went out of business, some of which have not come back because of what happened. And what was the response to it by Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick? First, they lied. They said it was the Green New Deal's fault, and they blamed it on windmills, which is completely ludicrous, as everybody's pointed out, has nothing to do with that. 87% of the power that reaches the grid comes from the oil and gas, not from clean energy in this. And what did they do? They didn't mandate weatherization. They didn't mandate it. They left it up to the companies to do it. The same companies that in this 8-day period of time had the greatest transfer of wealth in the history of our state. $6 billion in 8 days went from ratepayers to a few energy companies. It was the greatest transfer of wealth. And they didn't mandate those companies to fix it. They left it up to them if they wanted to or not, even though 10 years ago they were warned to fix this. They never did it. And now, even after what happened last February, they didn't fix it. And what only thing they did was make it easier to charge ratepayers more. That's the only thing they passed. They made it easier to charge ratepayers more. So for me, what I think we ought to do is, one, we ought to mandate the fix, paid for by those folks, not paid for by us, but paid for by those folks. They should have done it 10 years ago. They should have done it 6 months ago. It should be mandated, and they should pay for it by us. The second thing is, which was introduced by some Democrats this session, which is give people incentives to weatherize their homes. A lot of Texas homes, a majority of Texas homes are not energy efficient. And you can make them energy efficient at low cost with incentives from the state that would reduce the power. One, it would reduce our carbon imprint overall because people would be using less power. And two, it would put less stress on the electric grid. So those two things, mandating weatherization by those companies, paid for by them, and two, incentives for people to weatherize their own homes so that they don't have to, so the energy efficient is used less in the winter and less in the summer. It would draw less on the grid, and it would actually help in the sort of our step towards fixing this climate change problem that it faces the world.
Okay, that's great. Now, how would you appeal to Latino voters in South Texas and elsewhere who have strayed and voted Republican in the last election?
So I've watched this for a while, and this is something that's actually been something that I've in the campaigns I've done has been incredibly important. So the way I think it should be approached is for too long, many Democrats have approached Latinos that are like they're just to get out the vote group. So they talk to them in the last 2 weeks or the last 10 days and tell them, get out the vote, go vote, go vote, go vote, assuming that, oh, that I didn't need to, give them a compelling message. I didn't need to relate to them. And they just said, assume they're going to vote Democratic. And they didn't. And Republicans at the same period of time treated Latinos like they were a swing voter group. They talked to them, they related to them, even though, in my view, all of the Republican policies are completely antithetical to those Latino families. But they did have a conversation, and they were treating them not as just an assumption of you're going to get my vote. And Democrats have to start treating Latino voters, all voter groups, but especially Latino voters, which is, to me, they're going to be the most important voting group and who determines who holds office in this state, as a swing voter group, that they have an ongoing conversation about what's important to them, what messages are important to them. And the only time they don't hear from a Democrat is a week before Election Day, which by and large has been the history here for 20 years. Democrats call them up, say, vote, 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 and never tell them, well, why, what's it, what are you going to do for me? What are your values as a candidate versus my values I share? And so that, to me, is the most fundamental shift that needs to happen, is stop treating Latino voters like they're get out the vote voters and start treating the Latino voters like the importance they are and the swing group they have become.
I think that's great advice. Now let's move over to schools, and let's move over to some of the current issues right now with COVID, because we have to get this out under control. We cannot continue the way we've been going for the last 2 years. It's just too much. So how would you deal with masks mandates and vaccine mandates in schools and workplaces?
So this, I'm gonna both make this a political thing and a personal thing. My youngest daughter, who just went to college, is lung compromised. She's very lung compromised, and if she catches a cold, it's exceedingly problematic. Just even a cold, it's exceedingly problematic. She was born what they call a super preemie, which was 23 weeks. She was less than a pound when she was born, and she has scarred lungs, and she has all kind. She's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful girl who's overcome all of her obstacles to succeed in what she's done. But this became a very personal thing of, like, I don't understand why people don't understand that there is people out there that you're not just doing it for yourself, you're doing it for others. Which is the amazing part of this is, as I said, I'm a person of faith. I thought the Gospels taught us that with all of the actions we should do were about others and how we help others and how we're compassionate to others, not whether or not I'm like want to wear a piece of cloth on my face or want to allowing school districts to do things. And so to me, this has been one of the worst things that the leadership of the state has done, which is we're faced with this massive problem that has both hurt our economy and hurt thousands and thousands of people. People have died. And their interest was not in protecting the population of the state of Texas. Their interest was appealing to the small group of people who somehow made an argument that they had the freedom to harm others. I mean, that's really what this was. They had the freedom to harm others in this. It's the same. I look at this like drunk driving, right? I look like you don't have the freedom to drive drunk, because if you drive drunk, you're going to harm somebody. And the same is true of health protocols on this. And so the lieutenant governor and the governor basically told school districts and told cities and told counties they couldn't protect their own community. They mandated no mandates, which is an amazing situation to me. It's the opposite of what I thought for years the Republican Party was stood for, which was local control, local decision making, make what's been the best interest. And so we have to, and hopefully, as if we're elected and others are elected, we have to get back to the time where local school districts, teachers and administrators, and cities and counties can make the decisions they need to make to protect their populations, especially in the midst of a pandemic. I mean, to me, this is so, and I say that I come from this personally, but I also come from this, having been informed by the idea that the whole entire premise of our country was based on the idea of the common good and the common welfare, and the idea that we're going to do things that just because somebody says, I don't want to wear a mask or I don't want to get a vaccine, that actually harms other people in the state, is so far removed from what I thought were the founding principles of our country.
That's all very true. I believe very similar to that as well. We had a question from someone in the chat group that wanted to know what your position was with transgender students playing in sports and the gender they are not assigned to.
So my view is this is another faux issue that the Republicans have created to stir up a cultural divide. There's been no Republican can point to that this is a problem anywhere, that somebody had a problem with this. So I believe that whatever gender, the idea that the state of Texas is determining who can play sports, and then it's going to take some middle school person that wants to play flag football to court to keep them off the team, is just so out of tune with our values here. So my view is whatever designation that person has made a decision is their gender, they should be able to participate in school in whatever way they want, sports, extracurricular activities, whatever it happens to be. And the idea that we're now attacking everybody. Now the latest is we're going to attack somebody based on their sexuality or their sex in this case. And it's not an issue. Nobody can point to a problem that this has ever surfaced in any school district in anywhere in the state.
That is so true. Thank you for that. So next let's talk about healthcare. And what is your position on the Medicaid expansion and actually implementing the Medicaid expansion in Texas?
So it should be expanded tomorrow, which should have been expanded yesterday. And you probably know the facts on this. It doesn't cost us anything. It costs us nothing because all of us pay $1 in federal taxes. Other states are getting that dollar back in Medicaid expansion and allowing people to be to have health access. Texas has the most uninsured people in the country. We have the most, over 4 million people are uninsured. We have the most uninsured children in the country. We have more uninsured children in the country. Immediately upon Medicaid expansion, 1.1 or 1.2 million people would be insured immediately. So it doesn't cost us anything. So you can't make an economic argument. It doesn't cost the state $1 in this. 2, it actually lowers the cost. If you have private health insurance, it actually lowers the cost of private health care, because what happens is the entire cost of healthcare drops, and therefore private insurance rates can drop because the level of cost of health insurance drops. So my argument to people, even if you're not going to pursue this or not going to be on this or not at the income level you could, as a private health insurance holder, you should be for this because it'll lower the cost of private health insurance. And 3 is within a year or two, it will create 240,000 jobs, because now more people need more doctors and more healthcare providers and more clinics and more all the things they need. So it's a job grower. good paying jobs. It lowers the cost of private health care, and it immediately it doesn't cost us anything, and it immediately puts 1.1 or 1.2 million people under healthcare coverage. To me, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is a no-brainer. So I want to tie this in with something else. With what is your position on how you would reach out and appeal to rural Texas voters?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the things we have to do is we have to go to them and visit them, which I've already started to do. I've been to 20 something counties already, a mix of both urban and rural. So one, we have to go to them and not just give up on the idea and say that it's all about Austin, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Fort Worth, El Paso. So go to them, talk to them. But I think even when we talk to them, we have to engage them. This goes back to the original point I made about how Democrats can win. We have to relate to them on values. And we have to relate to them like, in my view on this, it says, hey, I know that you voted Republican or you've done this, but don't you want the same values in your leaders that you actually want in your friends or people that you work with? Don't you want people that you can trust and are honest? Don't you want people that care about others? Don't you want people that believe in the same sort of decent way of living that you do? And I think it has to be the conversation with rural voters has to be driven primarily about a relationship that we have with them on values, because we all, and though we seem like we're out of sync with rural voters, we all actually share the same values. But I think too often it becomes a lead on the issues and not lead on the values in rural. And it's really important in rural America, who in this state, again, I'll make the argument that all of the policies that Republicans have done have not helped rural America. They've actually harmed rural Texas. But they don't see a lot of Democrats, and they oftentimes hear a Democrat come up with some serious policies that they don't first engage with them on a set of values. So engage with them, see them, visit them, and engage with them on the broad values first, so they can understand, like, yeah, the same values that you taught your children are the same values we ought to expect in our leaders.
I think that's really true. And one of the reasons I brought it up is because rural hospitals are closing. And several years ago, we had 300 rural hospitals. We're now currently at 156 rural hospitals. They're closing. They started closing very quickly after 2013. This all happened under the Republican watch. And a lot of it started happening right after Obamacare, because they wouldn't accept the Medicaid expansion. So by not accepting it, it had a huge impact on.
Texas. So here's the interesting about Texas. This is the thing that Texas is the second wealthiest state in the union. We have the second greatest gross domestic product, second in the union. We have the third biggest budget. We have the third biggest state budget in the union. We are in the bottom 10 on almost all of these issues. We are in the bottom 10 on access to hospitals. We have more counties in Texas than any other state that doesn't have a hospital, more so than any other state. We're last or second to last in healthcare access. We're in the bottom 10 in child nutrition. We're in the bottom 10 in education resources. We're in the bottom 10 in protection of natural resources. And as proud Texans, how we can be satisfied with the fact that we're one of the wealthiest states in the union with one of the biggest budgets in the union, but we're in the bottom 10 in all of these categories, we should not accept that as people that are in this state and are proud to be Texans.
Yes. So one of the main issues that's come up in our group, because I asked all of our members, what are your pain points in rural Texas? Let's talk about this, because I really feel like people living in urban areas really need to listen to people living in rural areas. So the thing that's come up again over and over is the broadband issue. So I did a little bit of research into this, and is it true that one of the major things that is funding broadband right now is actually Biden's infrastructure bill? And currently the comptroller set up a broadband office, and they are funding it with money from the COVID bill that the Biden plan provided. And they're setting up ready to go, waiting for the Biden infrastructure bill to pass, which I just find this whole entire thing kind of hilarious, because they're setting it up, but they're also they're getting ready to use the money from Biden's plan, but they're also working against Biden every chance they get. And it just drives me crazy.
Well,
because working against rural Texans.
Almost, I mean, this is the difficulty. So almost everything that in Biden's plan, not only on broadband and getting people access, which actually then is related to things like telemedicine and all of those things. So you're able to actually engage on a month. It's not just somebody searching the internet. It's actually an ability to sort of access information and access things like healthcare in these rural areas. Almost every part of the plan benefits rural areas as much or more than urban areas, almost every part of Biden's plan. The problem we get into, and this is, I think that this is why we have to overcome this with the values argument, is that rural voters right now feel culturally disaligned with Democrats. They feel culturally disaligned with Democrats. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is they have come to this conclusion, being told by Republicans, that the Republicans are the party of religion and faith, that we're the party of religion and faith. And this is an important aspect of rural voters, and Democrats aren't, right? Even though Joe Biden is much more of a person of faith than President Trump ever was. Barack Obama was much more of a person of faith than Donald Trump ever was in this. Bill Clinton was basically a preacher president in the course of this, which is actually interesting to me, because all of the great successful national leaders in the Democratic Party have always been able to talk in a language of faith that could relate to people. That's why in many ways they succeeded. Martin Luther King is a great example. Martin Luther King spoke about civil rights and voting rights from a language of faith. And I think we have to be better in our communications to not skip over the idea of a language of faith to rural voters, because as I said, the block for them for supporting where Democrats are is usually cultural, and it's usually aligned because they assume, and I've had this conversation with a lot of our voters, they assume that, anybody that's a Democrat is like somehow, doesn't believe in going to church or doesn't believe in that. And I think if we're able to cross that bridge, which other Democrats have done, we'll be much more successful to then have the rational conversation with voters about policies that will help them.
That's great. Thank you so much. Now, we're going to take maybe like one or two more last questions. One of the things that is recent in Texas that's been a hot issue has been all the gerrymandering that's going on right now in Texas. So what is your position on gerrymandering, and how would you deal with gerrymandering if you were lieutenant governor?
So my position is what's been done on this is completely disenfranchised most Texans. So the maps that are out now do not reflect Texas diversity at all. Zero. Texas diversity politically, and Texas diversity just from whether you're Hispanic or African American or Asian American or whatever. It does not reflect Texas diversity at all. And so we now have created a system where it's disenfranchised people because of these maps that have been done. I fear that we're going to be dealing with these maps. I hope court cases are successful. I think we're going to be dealing with these maps. We're going to have to do everything we possibly can to overcome this. But the fact Texas added 4 million people in the last 10 years, and 95% of those people were people of color. 95% of the 4 million people were added, and not a single, we actually have less Latino districts, less African American districts, and less Asian American districts from 10 years ago we're going to have in this. We're going to have to overcome this by voting and by getting active in this. One of the premises I think that Republicans made is they draw a district assuming the electorate is going to look like X. If we make the electorate look like Y, we can win some of these seats that we otherwise think we can't, but we're going to have to overcome these impediments. The other thing that I would do, if we win these elections, there's nothing that precludes me from redrawing districts in 2023. It's not. We can redraw districts anytime we want in the course of the decade. So we can, if we have the votes in Austin in 2023, we can redraw state rep districts, state senate districts, state board of education districts. We can redraw them. And if we don't have the votes in 2023 and we have them in 2025, we can redraw them in 2025. We ought to have districts that reflect the diversity of the state. And the districts the Republicans drew do not reflect the diversity of the state.
Thank you so much. So let's talk a little bit about the hot button issue today. And today, I guess the last few days, if we count the last couple of days and today, has been, as you know, in Central Texas, we've had a lot of anti-Semitism happening here. Some synagogues that have been arson, some banners. One of them is flying over my neighborhood, actually, in Austin. And wanted to see what you thought about that, and then also what you think about Let's Go Brandon.
Well, so I'll deal with the first. I mean, it's outrageous that we're in 2021 and we're having a conversation about, and we're having this dealing with anti-Semitism. And now we've obviously have dealt with, over the course of the last 5 years, anti-immigrant, anti-Hispanic, anti-Black, anti-women, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim. This has all sort of been a brewing pot of hate that has existed out there, given a pass or enabled by Republican leaders, either by not condemning it in a way that people believe it, that these groups believe it there, because I think they think, oh yeah, it's a wink and a nod in this, and they're saying they don't like it, but they really like it. It's sort of the wink and the nod because of all of this ecosystem of hate that exists out there. But we ought to have, this ought to be the fundamental value we have. We ought to have leaders that represent our basic human values in this, and treating and looking at a Texas that is diverse and multicultural as an asset and a benefit, not as a negative. And that's the difference I think this election is about. I'm a huge believer in the more diverse and more inclusive and the more represented a organization is, and let's call it politics, the more successful it's going to be. And that doesn't exist on the Republican Party at this point in time. And the Let's Go Brandon thing, I wouldn't allow, if my 5-year-old did that in some code language it's a code language to basically cuss out the president, cuss out Joe Biden in this, and the idea that it's taken on like it's funny, it's another crassness and coarseness that I can draw a direct line to all of these hate things that have happened. It's just another step in the crass and coarseness of our politics that Republican leaders are not only actually not condemning, but they're actually treating it and fanning the flames of it. That is why we reach this sort of ignited part of hate that now evidences itself all around.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. I think I really like all of your viewpoints. And
Thank you.
I want to thank you so much for taking the time to meet with our group today, Mothers Against Greg Abbott. And just, we found this session to be very informative, and it was so great to talk to you. It was great to meet you at the Women's March. It was kind of fun. And I really hope that we can have you back again, especially as, you know, the campaign heats up. I hope we can have you back again. And I think we asked almost everybody's questions that were in the group. And if we didn't get to your question, maybe we'll get to it this next time that we meet with you.
I would love to do it again anytime. Again, big brava to you all for all the work you do in helping our state and moving us forward in this. If people want to volunteer in any way, they can sign on dowdtexas.com. We would love a volunteer. The only thing I want to conclude with is yes, politics is important. You're involved in it. I'm involved in it. But it's all about fundamentally about us. But if there's ways you can help your community and your neighborhood today, that to me, in like how we treat one another at the grocery store, what we do at the gas station, whether or not their refrigerator went out 3 doors down or across town or whatever, those are to me are the big, we obviously absolutely need to change our politics, and we need to change the politicians that are in office. But we also, as we walk through our day, we also steps we can make to make this society and make our state a kinder, gentler place. And we ought to look for every opportunity to do that.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. And just to let everyone know, we do plan on meeting with Mike Collier as well as all of the other candidates that are running for some state of Texas offices. The seminars are open to everyone, and we hope to meet with everybody. So
thank you.
And hopefully we'll meet with you again soon.
I would love to. I'm all for it. Yeah, thank you all for all you do.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks for your time. You all have a wonderful day.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.